Okay, welcome to the deep dive. We've got this absolutely incredible stack of sources right in front of us today, generously shared by you.
Mm.
Looking through them, it's a real mosaic, touching on the epic journeys of migratory birds, ancient human ingenuity in the desert, modern conservation challenges.
Yeah, and the fascinating lives of dolphins, even the practicalities of border crossings, it's quite a mix.
It really is.
And this material really zeroes in on a specific part of the world, this area kind of hinted to be the southern Arava near Eilat and Aqaba, and it shows how it's a remarkable crossroads, not just geographically, but where diverse natural processes and layers of human history converge in really surprising ways.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to pull out the most important insights and, surprising connections hidden within your specific sources. We want to give you that shortcut to understanding what makes this place and the stories it holds so utterly compelling.
It's about going beyond just listing facts,
Yeah.
right? Finding what the material reveals about the bigger picture.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's start with something truly epic that just leaps out from these sources. The sheer scale and phenomenon of bird migration. It's almost mind-boggling.
It really is. And this material immediately highlights the significance of this region. What we learn is that birds don't just, randomly fly across the globe.
Uh-huh.
They navigate using specific routes, like invisible highways in the sky. We call them flyways.
Flyways, okay. And what determines these paths, according to the sources? These aren't arbitrary routes, are they?
No, not at all. They're shaped by incredibly practical needs. Think about safety, flying over vast open sea, especially during a storm or with predators around. That's incredibly risky for tiny birds.
Right, so they avoid that if they can.
Yeah, they often choose to fly around large bodies of water. They also try to avoid geographical barriers where possible immense deserts or towering mountain ranges. But perhaps most critically, as the sources emphasize, they need fueling stations.
Ah, like pit stops on a road trip.
Exactly. Imagine a cross-country drive. You wouldn't plan it without knowing where you can stop to refuel, right?
Yeah.
Birds need places to land, rest, and crucially, find food to power journeys of thousands of kilometers.
And this specific location, revealed in your sources, is critical because it sits on the land bridge connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. For many species, it's the only viable way to cross between these continents without a dangerous, massive sea flight.
Which explains the staggering numbers mentioned.
Yeah.
This material tells us that 500 million birds use this single flyway.
500 million.
Yeah, 500 million, many of them forest birds. It's a bottleneck for global biodiversity, concentrating incredible numbers of species in one narrow corridor.
Wow. Okay, so why? Why do they even undertake these incredible long-distance journeys in the first place? What forces them to migrate?
Well, this material connects it all back to the sun, to solar energy and the simple factor of the length of daylight.
Daylight hours, how does that work?
It's the fundamental engine driving the ecosystem, really. In the northern latitudes during summer, you get incredibly long days, sometimes 20 hours or more of sunlight.
Right.
This provides immense energy for plants, the base of the food web, allowing for massive photosynthesis. They produce abundant nectar, pollen, fruits, seeds, all the fuel needed for the entire ecosystem.
Got it. More sun, more plant growth, more food.
Exactly. And those long daylight hours are also absolutely essential for birds to raise their young. Parents aren't just feeding themselves, they're feeding multiple hungry chicks in the nest.
Ah, so they need the extra time to gather enough food?
Precisely. That demands a huge amount of time spent foraging and delivering food, which is only possible with long daylight hours.
Okay, so summer up north is party time for birds, plenty of food, plenty of time.
Pretty much, yeah. A time of food abundance and ample time to exploit it and raise families. But then winter arrives,
And the days get shorter.
dramatically shorter. The sun's energy weakens. Plants stop producing food, they drop their leaves, and snow or fallen leaves cover whatever resources are left on the ground.
So the buffet closes down.
You could say that. The ecosystem has to adapt. Some creatures hibernate, some store food like squirrels do.
Right.
But for a vast number of bird species, the most effective strategy is migration. Fly south to find places where days are still long enough and food is available throughout the winter months.
It's one of nature's most powerful strategies for dealing with changing conditions.
Absolutely. And this material makes a key point. Migration isn't just about birds moving. This flyway acts as a crucial corridor for genetic movement as well.
Genetic movement.
Mhm.
How?
Think about plants. Their seeds can be carried in birds' digestive systems or pollen on their feathers. So the birds are effectively moving genes and ecological services across continents along these routes.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. It's not just the birds moving, but everything they carry with them.
Exactly. It connects ecosystems on a massive scale.
Okay, let's zoom in now from that vast continental scale to the individual bird's experience, starting even before it's hatched. This material offers a really unique perspective on a bird egg.
Yeah, it describes the bird egg as a truly unique form of external pregnancy, which is a great way to think about it.
External pregnancy.
Instead of a long internal gestation, all the complex resources needed for an embryo to develop into a bird are packed into that egg in just a single day.
One day. Serious.
One day. Then, once laid, development continues in the nest, needing little more than warmth and oxygen from the parent.
That's amazing. And when that chick finally hatches, the sources describe a state of utter helplessness.
Oh, completely. They're tiny, featherless, totally unable to regulate their own body temperature. They can't see. All they can really do is scream for food and eat.
So incredibly vulnerable.
Totally. But the parents take over completely, providing warmth and bringing in food constantly. And the speed of development the sources highlight is just astonishing.
How fast are we talking?
In just about 3 weeks, that helpless little chick reaches adult size, is fully feathered, can fly, find its own food, and become independent.
3 weeks. From helpless blob to independent flyer?
Yep, 3 weeks. That rapid development is remarkable. And then they spend another month or two with the parents, building strength and honing skills, getting ready for that very first potentially epic migration.
Preparing for the big trip.
A journey that could be as long as 40,000 kilometers round trip for some species, which really underscores the vital importance of feathers.
Right, you can't fly 40,000 kilometers without good feathers.
Exactly. The sources note they are incredibly lightweight yet strong, absolutely essential for sustained flight over such distances. Poor quality feathers wear out quickly, making the demanding journey almost impossible.
Okay, so with billions of birds using this flyway, how do researchers actually keep tabs on them? This material delves into the practical science of bird monitoring, using trapping and banding techniques.
It's a detailed process. They use special nets called mist nets, designed to catch birds harmlessly. They're very fine, almost invisible.
And then what? Handling tiny birds must be tricky.
It requires a lot of care. Once caught, the birds are handled incredibly gently, often placed in soft cloth bags.
Bags? Why bags?
It helps keep them calm, reduces stress, keeps them warm, and prevents them from injuring themselves while they wait to be processed. One anecdote even suggests it's like a little blanket hug.
A bird hug. Okay, so they're safe in the bag.
Then the researchers examine the bird's physical condition, and crucially, they attach a tiny lightweight ring or band to one leg.
I like a little bracelet.
Yeah, the material compares it to us wearing a watch. It's very light, doesn't impede them.
And this band has a unique ID number.
Exactly. A unique number and information about where and when it was ringed.
So if someone finds that bird later,
Anywhere in the world, whether caught by another researcher, found injured, or even found dead, they can report the ring number and trace its journey back. It builds up a huge picture of migration routes, lifespans, site fidelity.
But the monitoring goes beyond just tracking individuals, right? It's about population health.
Yes, absolutely. It's about gathering statistical data on the health and condition of bird populations. This helps understand how different species are faring and whether conservation efforts or habitat management at the site need adjusting.
How do they assess a bird's condition right there on the spot? The sources mention a couple of key checks.
One important indicator is the bird's age. They determine that by looking closely at feather replacement patterns.
Feather patterns tell you the age.
Adult birds replace all their feathers. That's called molting, usually before migration. Young birds, on their first journey, might only replace some body feathers, but keep their wing and tail feathers from the nest. So looking closely at the feathers tells you if it's an experienced migrant or a first-timer.
Okay, interesting. What else? Fat levels?
That's the other crucial check. They can actually see the fat reserves under the skin, particularly on the abdomen or near the wishbone. They gently blow the feathers aside.
And what do they see?
Yellow coloring indicates subcutaneous fat. That's the essential fuel for the long flight. Red indicates muscle and blood, meaning less fuel reserve.
Ah, so yellow is good, red means running on empty.
Basically, yes. And the source gives a great example with a specific bird, the lesser whitethroat, referred to as the bird of the week, arriving with half a tank of fuel, as mentioned.
Half a tank, so that's good news.
That's considered positive feedback from the bird itself. If birds are arriving at the site with good fat reserves, it tells the researchers that the habitat is providing sufficient food resources and is a safe place for them to stop and refuel.
And if they arrive without fat?
Conversely, if they see a species like, say, reed warblers consistently arriving without fat, that's a red flag. It signals a potential problem somewhere along their route before they got here, or maybe the specific habitat they rely on at this site isn't adequate.
Which means they might need to change how they manage the site.
Exactly. It might indicate a need for specific management intervention, like creating or enhancing habitat for certain species.
They also check the bird's weight alongside fat levels, right? To track condition over time.
Yes, weight combined with fat gives a fuller picture of condition. And this material adds some really lovely specific details about bird anatomy that aid survival, like how flexible their heads are, allowing for near 360-degree vision, useful for spotting predators.
And that little detail about holding the bird gently.
Yeah, the anecdote about it providing comfort by sharing body temperature, like a biological hug, it's a reminder of, our shared needs for warmth and security, even cross species.
Okay, shifting from the individual bird to the broader picture of conservation. This material highlights a really unique aspect of the area described. It's a nature area deliberately coexisting with heavy industry, specifically a salt factory.
Yeah, that's quite unusual. And it's not presented as just another nature reserve. The sources articulate a much broader mission. It's about using the site as a tool to change people's hearts and recruit support for protecting the entire flyway, not just this one patch of land.
Change people's hearts, that's a big goal.
It is, and that mission influences their operational decisions. For instance, the decision mentioned to limit guiding to staff only.
Why do that? You'd think more guides means more outreach.
Well, the rationale given isn't just about ensuring quality of information, though that's part of it. It's to make sure visitors get the real picture, connecting with the underlying mission and the story of the flyway, rather than just getting a disconnected tour of birds. They want guides who live and breathe the mission.
Okay, so it's about deeper engagement.
And this approach also ties directly into financial realities. The material is quite open about guiding fees, making up the majority of the sanctuary's pretty low budget.
So visitors are directly funding the conservation.
Yeah, this self-generated income is vital for maintaining what sounds like a huge area and carrying out essential conservation work across the southern Arava.
They introduce a concept here they call the theory of change. What's that about?
Yes, and it's quite a pointed view based on their experience. Their theory is that real effective change in conservation comes from fostering a sense of personal purpose and engaging in local, community-based work.
Like what kind of work?
Things like organizing events, conducting education programs, direct interaction with people in the region, getting the local community invested.
And they contrast this with other approaches.
Yeah, they sharply contrast this with approaches they critique, like relying on international bodies such as the UN. They see that sort of high-level, distant work as largely ineffective for achieving tangible, on-the-ground results in conservation compared to building local support.
So local action trumps international bureaucracy, in their view.
That seems to be the core belief. It's about convincing the people who live and work there. And that's a significant challenge, as the material points out.
How so?
Well, how do you convince local decision makers, maybe people on a nearby kibbutz, for example, to vote against a potentially profitable project, say a wind turbine farm, that might harm migratory birds?
Right. Jobs versus birds. That's a tough sell sometimes.
Exactly. Nature is often seen as a burden, something that hinders development, takes up space, competes with jobs rather than a treasure, providing essential ecological services we all rely on, often invisibly.
That brings up the difficult reality of conflict between human activity and nature, particularly bird-man conflict, like birds eating valuable agricultural crops.
The sources acknowledge this head-on. The historical, often harmful approach is simply to kill the birds seen as pests.
Which isn't really a solution.
Not a sustainable one, no. But the modern challenge, and what this material advocates, is finding creative, often complex solutions. The example used is the Hula Valley up north with the cranes.
Ah, the cranes in the hula. What do they do there?
Well, it's not a purely nature-based approach in the sense of just letting nature take its course. It involved intentionally creating a managed feeding area.
A feeding area for wild birds.
Yeah, to concentrate the cranes in one spot, providing them with food there to draw them away from the farmer's fields and prevent significant crop damage.
So it's a compromise, an intervention, really.
It is, yeah, a form of intervention, but one that protects the birds from being persecuted while also addressing the farmer's legitimate concerns.
It's about finding ways to coexist, even if it's not perfectly natural.
Precisely. And the material circles back to the fundamental point that most of the time, birds actually provide incredibly valuable services to people, even if those benefits aren't always immediately obvious or valued by everyone. Pollination, pest control, seed dispersal.
Right. Okay, let's dive into a specific local ecosystem highlighted in the sources, the salt ponds, and its most iconic resident, the flamingo.
Ah, yes, the flamingos. These salt ponds are part of the industrial process for producing salt, and they feature exceptionally hypersaline water. The sources say around 4.1% salinity.
That's really salty, right? Saltier than the ocean.
Significantly saltier, yeah. And the critical food source that allows flamingos to thrive in this unique environment. A tiny brine shrimp called Artemia salina.
Artemia salina. The sources seem fond of it.
Described quite fondly in the material as yummy, yummy, good for my tummy. These shrimp are only about a centimeter long, but absolutely essential for the flamingo's diet here.
And the salt company plays a role.
Yeah, the sources mention that the salt company, the Aris Group, provides the water that creates the habitat for these shrimp year-round. Which means, interestingly, the flamingos technically don't have to migrate from here just for food. The buffet is always open, so to speak.
But they do still migrate, according to the sources.
Yes, primarily for reproduction. They often travel to distant sites, maybe France or Turkey, to breed. They don't nest and reproduce at this specific site every year, despite the food availability.
Interesting. And their feeding mechanism sounds wild.
It really is fascinating to watch, apparently. They churn the water with their legs to stir up the bottom sediment where the shrimp live.
Stomping around.
Kind of, yeah. And then they use their specialized beak and their tongue like a piston, filtering out the brine shrimp from the water at an incredible speed. The material says maybe 4 times a second.
Wow, just filtering out tiny shrimp that fast. Slightly unusual historical detail from the sources. Roman emperors eating flamingo tongues.
Yeah, bizarre, isn't it? Supposedly as a sign of extreme wealth and power. An indicator of how rare and maybe exotic they were considered.
Quite a contrast to the modern economic reality mentioned. Salt production itself isn't particularly profitable today because salt is just, well, cheap.
Right. It's a bulk commodity.
And these salt ponds and the areas the flamingos use are also part of a modern urban planning challenge, right? The city of Islet nearby needs space to expand.
And the land occupied by the ponds is apparently eyed for development, creating a direct point of potential conflict between conservation and urban growth. It's a classic dilemma.
The sources also include practical advice for visitors watching the flamingos.
Yeah, just basic stuff. Approach calmly and silently. It's about respecting the bird space and ensuring you get the best possible experience observing them without causing stress or making them fly off. Common sense, really.
Okay, speaking of brine, shrimp, and flamingos, your sources contain one of the most bizarre and utterly fascinating biological tales I've ever come across, the story of the tiny flatworm.
Ah, the flatworm. This is truly wild stuff revealed in the material. Just buckle up.
I'm ready. What does it do?
It described how this tiny flatworm gets ingested by a brine shrimp, the Artemia we just talked about.
Yeah.
And then somehow it makes its way directly to the shrimp's central nervous system.
That's the brain, basically.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah.
And then it apparently starts manipulating the brine shrimp's behavior, taking control.
Okay, how? What does it make the shrimp do?
Yes, that's what the sources suggest. The flatworm essentially convinces the brine shrimp to do 2 key things. First, to cluster together in groups instead of swimming individually.
Safety in numbers. Or
Not in this case. And second, it makes them turn a distinct reddish-orange color.
Why would it make the shrimp do that? Turn red and hang out in groups. What's in it for the flatworm?
It's a parasite with a chillingly effective master plan. The sources explain that by making the brine shrimp cluster and turn reddish, it makes them significantly more visible and easier for the flamingos to spot and eat.
No way. So the flatworm is somehow compelling the brine shrimp to essentially advertise themselves to the predator. Like putting up a big eat me sign.
Precisely. Because, and here's the kicker, the flatworm can only complete its life cycle and reproduce in the highly acidic environment of the flamingo's stomach.
Whoa.
It's a remarkable, if slightly horrifying, example of a parasite manipulating the behavior of its intermediate host, the shrimp, to ensure it gets transferred to its definitive host, the flamingo, allowing it to reproduce.
That's truly mind-bending. A tiny creature orchestrating the behavior of another to get itself eaten? Nature is weird.
Isn't it
Hmm.
just? And the sort has also briefly mentioned a theory about how the brine shrimp might have even gotten into these isolated salt ponds initially.
Ah,
It's tiny eggs or cysts that are really sticky and hardy,
yeah.
transported on the feet or feathers of, wait for it, birds,
Oh, go back.
possibly even flamingos themselves from other locations.
It all comes back to the birds, another unexpected connection.
Everything's connected.
Okay, let's pivot now to a completely different layer of history and human ingenuity explored in your sources. The ancient chain whales, also known as the fugara system. This is an incredible example of how people managed to thrive in the desert thousands of years ago.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff. This material describes a surprisingly large ancient farm, about 650 dunams, which is compared to roughly twice the size of the modern agricultural area at Ain Gedi, if you know that oasis.
Wow, that's big for the desert, and it dates back quite a way.
To the early Islamic era, roughly the 7th to 9th century CE, so over 1,000 years ago.
And the sources explain why this specific desert location was chosen for farming. It seems counterintuitive.
Right, but they had reasons. Apparently the land was flat, meaning they didn't need labor-intensive terracing like you see in hilly areas. The stones in the soil were small, making the land easier to clear. And critically, it was located near a market center, a Kaaba, and a major highway, allowing them to sell any surplus produce.
Okay, location, location, location. But the biggest challenge must have been.
Water. Always water in the desert.
And their solution was absolutely brilliant, right? This fugara system.
Incredible engineering. An underground water system based on a sophisticated understanding of the layers beneath the ground, identifying impermeable layers, permeable layers where water flows, and the aquifer where groundwater was stored.
So how did they get the water out and to the farm?
They would locate the water source high up in a wadi, maybe where groundwater came closer to the surface. They called this the mother well. Then they would dig an underground canal, a tunnel really, to transport that water using only gravity.
Just gravity. How did they manage the slope?
With incredible precision. These canals had to maintain an exceptionally shallow and constant slope over long distances. The sources specified just a 30-centimeter drop per kilometer. Imagine digging that underground.
30 centimeters per kilometer, that's almost flat. Requires amazing surveying skills.
Absolutely. And these weren't unique to this spot, were they? The sources mentioned similar systems found across the arid world.
Yeah, places like Persia, where they're called qanats, Morocco, Spain, even Peru, Japan, and China.
Suggesting either a fascinating instance of simultaneous invention in different cultures facing similar challenges, or a very effective spread of this complex engineering idea, maybe along trade routes or through empires, as the sources suggest.
What about those periodic vertical shafts they built along the underground canals? The sources had a memorable description. Upside-down nipples.
Huh. Yeah, that's one way to picture them from below. They served two main vital purposes.
Hmm?
One, they provided air, which was essential for the workers digging and maintaining the tunnels. You can't work long underground without ventilation.
Makes sense. And the second purpose?
Crucially, they were access points for maintenance. These systems weren't set-it-and-forget-it structures.
Right, tunnels underground must clog up or collapse sometimes.
Far from it. They required constant, extensive maintenance to clear out silt and repair collapses to keep the water flowing. And if one system failed, which was always a risk, the consequences could be catastrophic for a large farm in the middle of the desert.
So they had backups.
That's what the sources reveal. They often built parallel systems, 2 or even 4 fugara canals running alongside each other. If one broke down or needed cleaning, the others could still supply water. Redundancy was key.
Smart. And the sources use the example of a palm tree's thirst to highlight why this was so critical.
Yeah, mentioning a single palm tree might drink 800, 900 liters, maybe even a ton of water a day in the heat. Multiply that by a whole farm. Reliable, continuous water delivery was absolutely non-negotiable for survival.
And there's archaeological evidence suggesting water was easier to access back then, higher groundwater levels.
Yes, the material mentions findings like the roots of ancient palm trees found at the site being relatively short, suggesting they didn't have to reach as deep for water. Also, evidence of former springs in the area that are now dry. These are key indicators that the original builders would have looked for when locating that mother well.
Okay, staying with the Fugara site, the sources offer broader historical and archaeological insights. When did this particular system stop being used?
According to the material, around 807 CE. The decline and eventual abandonment are connected to a period of regional instability.
Instability? Like what?
Specifically, a rebellion mentioned, led by a local Bedouin sheik against the ruling Abbasid Empire at the time. When the wider political or economic stability fractured, These complex, high-maintenance water systems likely became impossible to sustain. The central support probably vanished.
Makes sense. They needed peace and organization to keep them running.
Exactly. The sources also touch on the archaeological significance of the site being deserted rather than destroyed violently.
What's the difference for archaeologists?
When people simply leave a place, they usually take their valuable belongings with them. So fewer everyday artifacts, tools, pottery, coins might be left behind for archaeologists to find, compared to a site that was suddenly destroyed in a battle or fire, trapping things in place.
Ah, okay. Less stuff left behind.
Mm.
And this material offers an updated historical perspective on this region. It wasn't always a backwater.
Right. That perspective has changed significantly, partly thanks to investigations like those at this site. When Damascus was the capital of the earlier Umayyad Caliphate, that's the ruling empire based there, before the Abbasids moved the capital to Baghdad, this area was actually strategically important, lying on key routes between Syria, Egypt, and the Hejaz.
So its importance waxed and waned depending on where the center of power was.
Precisely. It only became more peripheral after the capital shifted east to Baghdad around 750 CE.
This material also contrasts archaeological sites in resource-rich areas with those in deserts, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes an interesting distinction. In places with abundant resources, like fertile river valleys, archaeologists often study how societies harnessed or utilized those resources. Think irrigation in Mesopotamia or Egypt.
Okay.
But in the desert, the focus shifts fundamentally to adaptation despite difficulties. How did people survive and sometimes even thrive despite the lack of water and the inherent hardships? It's a different story.
And it highlights that history in the desert can be discontinuous, using a great analogy.
The mind the gap warning from the London Underground. A perfect analogy drawn from the sources.
Explain that.
Desert history often shows significant gaps, periods where settlements flourish and then disappear completely for centuries, leaving a gap in the archaeological record. Unlike places in resource-rich areas where you might find continuous layers of habitation, city built upon city over millennia.
Because survival was so precarious.
Exactly. And the crucial insight here, according to the sources, is that these often peripheral desert societies were highly dependent on the continued interest, support, and investment of a central, powerful regime, an empire, a kingdom to simply survive, let alone thrive. When that central support wavered, the desert settlements often collapsed.
Fascinating. Dependency on the center. Okay, let's touch briefly on a few other interesting spots mentioned in your sources, highlighting some unique details. There's mention of the Dead Sea farms, for instance.
Yeah, just a brief note about environmental improvements there over the years. Apparently in the past, dust from fertilizer production used to blow around quite a bit, and there were concerns it might even reach and harm the coral reefs further south in the Gulf of Aqaba.
But it's better now.
The material suggests that now, driving through, you see significantly cleaner air, indicating a positive environmental change has occurred there. Controls must have improved.
Good to hear. There's also mention of a free public beach in the area.
Yes, noted as one of the apparently few publicly accessible stretches of coastline there, something initiated by a former finance minister, according to the source material. Just a point of access.
And a place called William's House. Sounds intriguing.
This is described as a historical British strategic post built in the 1930s before the modern state existed. It served a military purpose, kind of overseeing the region during the British Mandate period.
Okay, a colonial outpost. Any other significance?
Surprisingly, yes. It had an unexpected scientific and industrial connection. It was located near a source for a unique mineral called plagioclase feldspar, found nearby.
Plagioclase feldspar. What was that used for?
Get this, according to the source, it was reportedly mined or collected and used in the British false teeth industry at the time.
British false teeth. From a mineral near a desert military post.
Strange but true, apparently. That's a detail you certainly wouldn't guess. A weird little connection across continents and industries.
Definitely not. Okay, let's move down to the coastal area proper and the border. The sources mention the world's oldest underwater observatory first.
Yes. Located here, described as a private, family-owned institution specifically focused on coral reef ecology. And the Inter-University Marine Biology Institute is right next door, also dedicating its research to these reefs.
So the whole coastline is basically a research zone.
Essentially, yeah. The sources emphasize that the entire coastline here is treated as a sensitive nature reserve focused on the unique coral reefs.
Okay. And then there's the Taba border crossing with Egypt. Your sources give us some practical logistics for anyone thinking of traveling across.
It's noted as being open 24/7 year-round, with the exception of major Jewish holidays like Yom Kippur, when it closes completely.
Good to know. What about bringing things across? Food allowed.
Usefully, yes. The sources state you are allowed to bring food across the border into Sinai.
But there are some interesting restrictions on vehicles mentioned.
Yes, this is quite specific. According to these sources, you cannot bring 4x4 vehicles or diesel engine vehicles across this particular border crossing into Egypt.
Any reason given?
The sources don't definitively state why. For the diesel restriction, it might be an older rule or specific to this crossing. The 4x4 limitation, though, is speculated to be related to security or control, perhaps, to prevent people from easily venturing off-road into sensitive military areas or uncontrolled parts of the Sinai Desert.
Okay, that makes some sense. And what about visas for travelers, particularly Israelis?
For Israeli passport holders, the sources explain that an automatic visa is granted upon arrival at Taba, but, and this is important, it's only valid for the eastern side of the Sinai Peninsula, basically the coastal strip down towards Sharm el-Sheikh and the high mountains area around Mount Sinai St. Catherine's.
So if you want to go further west in Egypt,
If you plan to travel further west beyond that designated Sinai zone, you need to obtain a prior visa from the Egyptian embassy before you travel.
and the process can take longer for Israelis.
The material notes that, yeah, the visa application process can apparently take significantly longer for Israelis compared to, say, American or European travelers applying for the same visa. Worth factoring into planning.
That's a really important practical detail for anyone planning travel in the region, maybe combining visits.
Definitely. The sources specifically mention places like Sharm el-Sheikh and Mount Catherine as being within that accessible eastern Sinai zone from this crossing, highlighting the connections for tourism and pilgrimage.
Okay, finally, let's wrap up our deep dive into your sources at Dolphin Bay. This section offers some remarkable insights into the intelligence and empathy of dolphins.
Yeah, the material here is quite rich. It describes the interaction at this specific site as built on mutual recognition and trust developed over years.
How do they recognize each other?
They recognize individual dolphins by sound, primarily their unique signature whistle, which functions much like a name does for us. Each dolphin develops its own distinct whistle, and also by their appearance, markings, and personality. The relationship between the dolphins and the people involved is characterized as one based on trust and even affection.
And what do the sources reveal about dolphin social structure and behavior in general?
They highlight similarities to human families, noting how dolphins protect and assist one another within their pods. Their communication system, using those signature whistles and other sounds, is described as highly complex.
And emotionally?
Fascinatingly, the sources emphasize that they share a need for physical touch and comfort within their social relationships, similar to humans and other primates. Nuzzling, rubbing against each other, it's important social glue.
The sources also address a topic that can be controversial: dolphin sexual behavior, mentioning they're active for pleasure, not just reproduction.
Yes, it notes that observation, again drawing a parallel with humans and bonobos, and it presents a perspective from someone with extensive, long-term experience observing these specific dolphins.
Well, what's that perspective?
Suggesting that some behaviors that might occasionally be interpreted negatively by short-term observers, perhaps seeming aggressive or overly sexual, might simply be misunderstood interactions within their complex social dynamics, maybe forms of group bonding, play, or even self-interaction, rather than something sinister. It encourages looking at these behaviors with more context and less anthropomorphism.
Understanding nuance based on long observation. What about the relationship between dolphins and sharks? Are they natural enemies, as often depicted?
According to the sources, generally, no, not in the way people might think. Dolphins typically live in groups, in pods, and that group structure usually acts as a strong deterrent to most sharks.
Is safety in numbers again?
Exactly. Sharks tend to target sick, old, or wounded dolphins that might get separated, fulfilling their natural ecological role of removing weaker individuals from the population. It's part of the ecosystem balance.
So they don't usually fight?
Not typically.
Yeah.
While it's true that orcas, which are actually the largest species of dolphin, are known to hunt sharks, the kinds of dolphins usually found in places like this don't generally engage in conflict with sharks unless they are isolated or vulnerable. Group living is their primary defense.
Okay. And lastly, dolphin-assisted therapy, or DAY. Your material indicates you've maybe encountered research suggesting a lack of hard scientific proof for DAY providing a cure for conditions.
Yes, and the perspective offered in the sources aligns with that understanding. It's explicitly emphasized that this is assisted therapy, not a cure provided by the dolphin. That distinction is crucial.
So what is the benefit, according to this material?
The core benefit, as described here, comes from the powerful combination of two things. First, the inherently therapeutic environment of the water itself, the buoyancy, the sensory input. And second, the unique, engaging interaction with the dolphin.
And that interaction makes people feel good.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Making individuals, the examples given are children with autism or Down syndrome, or people dealing with PTSD, making them feel good, feel safe, engaged, maybe joyful.
And that feeling good is the key, isn't it? It's not magic.
Absolutely. The sources explain why that feeling is so important therapeutically. When individuals feel good, feel safe and motivated, it often makes them more open, more receptive to learning, and more willing to work on specific therapeutic goals with the human therapist.
Ah, so the dolphin interaction facilitates the human therapy.
Exactly. Goals like making eye contact, improving communication skills, becoming calmer, following instructions. The dolphin interaction is seen as a powerful catalyst, creating a positive state that enables the person to make progress. It's framed as helping the person help themselves, with the dolphin as a unique motivator, not the dolphin somehow curing them directly.
That makes a lot more sense. It's about creating a positive, engaging environment for therapy to happen.
Precisely. And the sources conclude the dolphin discussion with the idea that dolphins are almost universally loved creatures, and that their only real enemy is often human ignorance or misunderstanding.
How so?
They use the example of people misinterpreting a dolphin's facial structure, which looks like a permanent smile to us, as meaning it's always happy or inviting interaction. This can lead to people doing things like trying to jump on them or ride them, which can actually frighten or harm the dolphin. It's a poignant reminder that our assumptions about nature, however well-intentioned, can sometimes have negative consequences if we don't truly understand the animals.
Well, that was quite a journey through your sources. Wow. We started with the epic movements of 500 million birds using ancient flyways determined by sun and food.
Powered by tiny insects and needing safe places to land.
Delved into millennia-old water management systems built with brilliant desert ingenuity, the fugara.
Requiring incredible precision and constant maintenance, dependent on central stability.
Explored the complex lives of flamingos surviving in hypersaline ponds thanks to tiny shrimp, manipulated by even tinier flatworms.
Yeah, that flatworm story is still buzzing in my head.
Navigated modern conservation challenges that require unexpected compromises, like feeding cranes or balancing industry and nature.
And the whole theory of change, focusing on local hearts and minds.
And even looked at the practical realities of borders, British false teeth minerals, and the deep intelligence and misunderstood behavior of dolphins.
It really highlights how a seemingly specific location, the one revealed through your sources, can serve as a profound lens to understand such incredibly diverse and interconnected systems, both natural and human. It's all tied together in that one region.
And the value, as we've seen, of truly doing a deep dive into specific material like the sources you provided to uncover those surprising details and connections you might never otherwise stumble upon.
Absolutely. Extracting the unique insights from your particular stack of information is always the most rewarding part of doing a deep dive like this.
So what does all of this mean for you listening in? Thinking about everything we've covered today, from the incredible resilience of nature adapting through migration and, well, manipulative parasites,
Yeah.
to human ingenuity adapting to harsh desert environments with ancient technology, and the complex, sometimes misunderstood relationships between humans and other intelligent species like dolphins. What aspect of this deep dive stands out to you the most? What question does it leave you wrestling with?
Maybe it's about those connections. How the need for water links ancient farmers to modern cities. Or how a tiny bird links continents. Something worth reflecting on as you consider this unique corner of the world revealed in your sources.
Thank you for sharing your material and letting us take this deep dive with you today.